Hello, this is Dr. Paul Cottrell, and I'm going to be doing a special today. That special is going to be about Henry Kissinger. This is going to be a very unique video. I don't think anyone is going to be doing anything close to what I am doing. I'm sure that people will comment about Kissinger either in the positive light or the negative light. He was a very polarizing figure. Uh, there'll be people that probably will do some post processing with their video and it'll be more polished. But I think what I'm going to say is really unique um, and insightful. All right. So let's dive in. He died yesterday. Miss Taiwan calls me, and of course, Miss Taiwan is very pro Taiwanese and anti China. She hated Kissinger. I wish I had it recorded, um, but it was absolutely funny to hear her comments about Kissinger. I just wish I was able to share that conversation with you. But I think it's emblematic of how people in Taiwan feel about Kissinger and the Chinese U.S. policy or in the region, going all the way back to the Nixon days, all right? President Nixon, and how many Taiwanese are, feel as though the United States was selling them down the road, selling the Taiwanese down the road, with this one China policy. Now, my understanding with the one China policy, and it kind of goes into his dissertation and the work he did with the Council of Foreign Affairs, Foreign Relations, Council of Foreign Relations. This, what is it called? The CFR. There was a strategy going all the way back to Eisenhower on with the Korean War and the concern of the advancement of Russia and communism to try to put China into the orbit of the United States and do a slow build up of manufacturing and commerce that was more centric to the United States inside China. It was a multi-decade effort. It really accelerated depends on who you talk to. I think it really accelerated around 2000, just like 1999, 1998. When Walmart really was starting to buy huge amount of goods at lower prices and forcing manufacturers that were in the United States to go to China to get the lower cost to get into their stores. So I think that was a big dynamic. My observation was it was around 1998 when this is all happening. But in the news, I remember on the news on CNN, there seemed to be like an awareness in advertising and within the mainstream media of how China was going to be a major manufacturing engine. And this happens around when Bush gets elected, Bush Jr. So in 2000. So this transition between Clinton and Bush, I think, is an acceleration point. It wasn't the start. The start actually goes all the way back to when Nixon has his famous meeting with China, and that set the ball rolling economically. Militarily, it would seem to be being set in motion in the 50s with Eisenhower. All right, so that's the backstory. But it was fascinating to hear Miss Taiwan being Miss Taiwan about Kissinger. She's not a fan. Maybe I'll be able to get another conversation. We can have that published to the public. Maybe. I just wish I had it. It was funny, insightful, and just raw. It's raw of how people feel. All right. Now, to the history of Kissinger, and then I'm going to play someone that I actually admire. I'm going to play something, a journalist that has passed away that I admire greatly in terms of intellect. But let's start with a little bit of the backstory and the history. So Kissinger, I'm not going to read he has an extensive history. I'm not going to read the whole history. I'm just going to focus on his education and this the transition from the war, what he was doing in the war through his education, and how that was like the launching pad. This person, Henry Kissinger, had some people have a lot of luck, all right, at the right time, at the right place at the right time, knowing the right people. He's one of these types, okay? Some people would say, there was some sort of blessing or some mazel or some sort of thing that was there that made his travails easier than most. All right, so he going into the war years, okay, he enlisted, or he was stationed on June 19th, 1943, all right, in South Carolina at age 20. And at that time, he becomes a naturalized citizen. So he's not a U.S. citizen. He actually leaves Europe during the war to escape what was going on, and then he enlists into the U.S. military. So he was at the basic training camp in South Carolina. Okay, he was part of the he was getting training. He was studying the Army sent him to study engineering at Lafayette College in Pennsylvania under the Army Specialized Training Program, but the program was canceled and Kissinger was reassigned to the 84th Infantry Division. There he made the acquaintance of Fritz Kramer, a fellow immigrant from Germany who noted Kissinger's fluency in German and his intellect, and arranged for him to be assigned to the military intelligence. So this is the point I'm making, is that he was going in one direction, and just by luck, he's moving towards intelligence that will lead to higher positions in government. All right, so he goes into the military intelligence. Kissinger saw combat with the division and volunteered for the hazardous intelligence duties during the Battle of the Bulge. You know what's fascinating about World War II? They're no longer alive in our family, but we had quite a few World War II vets, and they always talk about the Battle of the Bulge. All of them, the ones that they were in the Army, that were in the European theater. We had ones that were in the Navy that were obviously in the Asian theater, and then we had ones that were in the Army. But they all talked about the Battle of the Bulge. But they're no longer alive. During the American advance into Germany, Kissinger, through only as a private, okay, lowest rank, right, was put in charge of administration of a city in Kruf, I think it's pronounced Krufeld, because of the lack of German speakers on the division's intelligence staff. So here again is that he has a unique set of knowledge at that time that is needed. Okay, keep that in mind. I'm sure that no one's doing this, especially when you see how I transition. All right. Okay. Then he is reassigned to counterintelligence. All right. The CIC, where he became a CIC special agent holding the enlisted rank of sergeant. And then it looked like he was stationed in Hanover. And what he was assigned to tracking down Gestapo officers and other saboteurs. He ends up getting the Bronze Star. Okay. In June of 1945, Kissinger was made commandant of the Benschem Metro CIC detachment. All right, so he's moving up the ladder pretty quickly here. All right, then this is an important piece, especially when you start thinking about Cambodia later down the road. So this is all taking place in the 40s. Although the possessed absolute authority and powers of arrest, although he possessed absolute authority and powers of arrest, Kissinger took care to avoid abuses against the local population by his command. All right. Fast forward to Cambodia and the bombing of Cambodia. So, I mean, you know, it's this person used rationality for war atrocities. All right. I'm not pro Kissinger at all, but I think there's something unique about him that's important to keep in mind. Okay, so let's fast forward. He was decorated as a war veteran during World War II. All right. So now he's fast forwarding to college. All right. So he ends up getting 3 degrees. All right. He ends up getting a political science degree from Harvard College. He was part of the Adams House. So the ones that are, for the ones that know that understand that's the where he stayed as an undergrad. His senior thesis was the meaning of history, reflections of Spengler, Toynbee, and Kant. Okay, so this guy's somewhat of a philosopher and a historian, which is this builds up. Okay, so now he ends up earning his Master's of Art and Doctor of Philosophy at Harvard University at 1951 and 1954. It was 1950. It looked like it was 1950 when he earned his undergrad. So he does his service in the Army, comes back, earns his undergrad degree in 1950, then earns his master's and his Ph.D. from Harvard in 1951 and 1954, respectively. All right. Now, fast forward, what was his doctoral thesis? His doctoral thesis was Peace, Legitimacy, and the Equilibrium. You got to remember, okay, this is in the 1950s. Remember what I was saying? It was just the beginnings of the realignment of how they're going to try to check Russia by bringing China potentially into the U.S. orbit. They were, at that time, we were in the Korean War, right? And or we were ramping that down, and we were concerned about that region, about this domino theory effect, right? So he's at the right place at the right time and wrote about the right things at this time. He's talking about the legitimacy and the equilibrium of countries. Okay, so this leads him down the road to meeting certain people, right? And eventually he ends up remaining at Harvard, and he gets a faculty. He's a member of the faculty in the Department of Government, where he served as the director of the Harvard International Seminar between 1951 to 1971. All right, so you're talking Eisenhower, right? I mean, and all the way into you know, he saw JFK, he saw Lyndon Johnson. He was actually tied to, I think, the campaign for Rockefeller that didn't for president that didn't work. So he was at a key moment in writing and pontificating about foreign policy at a very prestigious university, especially in this regional studies, because a lot of this regional study stuff that was happening at Harvard ends up being actually the war policy for the Vietnam era. All right, so then eventually in 1955, he was a consultant. He has this consulting business, right? Keep that in mind. He was a key player because he knew people in government, but he made money by interpreting what people are thinking on both sides. So in 1955, he was a consultant on the National Security Council's Operations Coordinating Board. During 1955 and 1956, he was also study director in nuclear weapons in foreign policy at the Council of Foreign Relations. So this is why I was saying is that he was at the right place at the right time and knew the right people. All right. And he's talking about legitimacy and equilibrium of countries. I think his dissertation focused more on the European countries. And his work at the CFR is dealing with nuclear deterrence. Remember what I said about his dissertation, equilibrium, nuclear deterrence. Okay. And then fast forward, he becomes a major important advisor, national security advisor to Nixon and the whole war and the Vietnam, and ends up being a major player internationally all the way to the point where he dies. And he died at age 100. Okay. So that's just there's a lot more history on him. Probably the most comprehensive book that you can read on Kissinger's history is probably Niall Ferguson's 2-volume series and 2-volume set on Kissinger, right? That has his private papers that he's writing from. So Kissinger gave the private papers to Niall Ferguson to write the book. So probably the most authoritative book about Kissinger is Niall Ferguson. Now you got to remember, there are kind of like two main camps for Kissinger: war criminal camp and major important diplomatic policymaker, foreign policymaker for the last 70 years or whatever. So there's kind of these two camps, right? Right. Hitchens, this is where we're going to transition into something that no one's going to be doing on YouTube. All right. So this is another first. All right. On my channel, I like doing first. All right. And everyone else copies, but it's okay, because, when Eddie Van Halen, created those famous riffs from their first album for Van Halen, everyone started copying it because there's a lot of people that aren't original. Okay. I'm an original person. Always have been, always will be. So, Christopher Hitchens is on the side of anti-Kissinger. Okay. Now, just to give you a backstory, when my brother died, my brother died from heart disease. And, we were raised in a conservative Jewish household, right? So we had very strong Jewish affinity, right? Um, with the holidays, but it was conservative. It wasn't ultra orthodox. It wasn't orthodox or anything. It was a good blend. Conservatism, I think today compared to the 70s is a lot different. And I think conservatism in America actually is shrinking for the Jewish faith. While you have orthodoxy or modern orthodoxy taking some of that group with them, and then the remainder is going towards reform. All right. So conservatism really doesn't really exist like it was in the 70s and 80s. That has more been brought into modern orthodoxy. Right. So the terms that we're using today are different than the terms that we had in the 70s, in the 80s. So so my brother dies from heart disease, and I, was angry. And so my other brother, the surviving twin, he moved more towards orthodoxy, right? While I kind of were, I was kind of still angry. I was, he was so young. Heart disease was a major problem in the family, especially on my mother's side. If you have all the risk factors, and he had all the risk factors. And it just, so I went down a path of trying to find myself, right? Being mad at God. It's okay to be mad at God, right? And I was always a big fan of Christopher Hitchens, watching him on the news broadcasts or C-SPAN or the book club or whatever. He's a prolific writer, and he's he's in a strange way on the intellectual side of Hitchens. That's the type of person I want to be. I don't want to be I don't want to be the person exactly like he was. There was a bohemianism about him that I don't appreciate. But there is an intellectual, humorous side of him that I think that people can learn from and try to bring into their personality. And he was a unique person, right? And as he died from cancer, from esophageal cancer, because he was a smoker and he drank a lot. And his father died from esophageal cancer. So if he didn't have a certain lifestyle, he would still be alive today to be able to comment about things that are going on. I've read some of his books. God is Not Great, Hitch 22. There was a book that was renamed. It's dealing with America's fascination of royalty from the UK. I forgot the name of it. Royal Blood or something like that. I forgot the name of it. But it was renamed Empire in Blood or Empire in America or something like that. I don't remember the name of it. So I've read some of his work. I really didn't focus on his writings that were published in magazines like Harper Magazine or Vanity Fair. He was a major contributor to Vanity Fair. So he was a political commentator, a philosopher, a historian. And he was a war correspondent. So he was, I would say, one of the best journalists that ever existed. All right, in terms of just raw intellect. But he was also, his mother was Jewish. His father was not Jewish, and he was raised in my understanding is he was raised as a Christian because his father was part of the military. I think it was the Navy. He was higher ranking, not super high, but mid-level ranking naval officer. And the mother was worried about her family being Jewish might hurt his position. So he was raised kind of, he wasn't raised as a Jewish child. I think that if you analyze him and you try to look at Hitchens without any bias, I think deep down inside he actually had some sort of regret of the decisions that his mother made in terms of hiding the religion from him. I think he, deep down inside, even though he's atheist, I think he wanted some sort of a Jewish education in the home. Usually that's from the mother, right? Because the mother takes care of the kids. So it's if the mother is hiding it, then the kids aren't going to be able to learn. So I think deep down inside, there was a regret. But the point I'm making is that when my brother died, I was kind of angry at God. It's understandable. And it was like for a few years, maybe, I don't know, maybe 3 years, maybe or so. And so I was reading, and at this time, he was really pushing his God is Not Great book. So I read it, and he was doing this big lecture circuit where he was arguing with the theologians, the rabbis, and the priests. And this is when Sam Harris comes onto the scene with his functional MRI dissertation, and he's also an atheist. And Daniel Dennett is a philosopher that's an atheist. And then the whole what was his name? The biologist that was also the atheist, Dawkins. So they were like the four horsemen, right? Battling the theologians. And so at this time period was when I was kind of like trying to reach equilibrium with my brother's death. So I learned a lot about Hitchens. I probably have seen almost every single video that has been published of Hitchens. Hundreds of hours. Every single lecture that's been published in video form or audio form. So I learned a lot about Hitchens. All right. And his switch from being a certain type, even his politics, I don't even agree with, but I understand and I appreciate his intellect and his way of forming the argument. Now, why is this important with Kissinger? Hitchens hated Kissinger. Kissinger hated Hitchens. Kissinger had a lot of power in politics, a lot of deep power internationally. Hitchens had a lot of power intellectually. All right. So it's important to see this. And what I'm going to do is not being done on other channels. Other channels will maybe do something about Hitchens in a positive light or a negative light, and it'll be nice and polished, right? But it's not going to be this rawness that I'm talking about, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to play the Washington Post. They're going to do about a 3-minute, memorial of Kissinger, and then we're going to transition into the hard-hitting Hitchens. I'm going to be playing the first video, the smaller video of Hitchens, the shorter video of Hitchens, where he's just about to, he's pretty close to dying. Within months, he was going to die. So there was a series of videos that were being recorded on Hitchens to kind of capture his last thoughts. And these are just months before he ends up dying. And there's a book that his very last book that he wrote. It hits the soul, because you can see as he was sketching in certain chapters, All right. So he builds up a skeleton. The way he writes is he builds up some sort of like a skeleton of text within the chapters. And as you go from one chapter to to another, it's more refined, more corporally assembled. All right. And so the first couple chapters are like a regular book, right? But as you move towards, you can see that hasn't finished it and he's drifting away until you get to the very end. And it's almost like he's evaporating. His thoughts are evaporating. And he's writing this while he's getting chemotherapy. So, you know, he has the chemo brain, right? The toxins, and you can't think, right? But you can actually see through his writing his soul departing from his body. Hitchens was a very important person to pay attention to. You don't have to agree with, but the thing is that there is a uniqueness about him in terms of intellect, humor, and the way of articulating the argument that can be learned. If you can reach that point, I'll call it the Hitchens point of intellect, you have accomplished something major in your life. That is something what I am trying to do. All right. I'm trying to get to the Hitchens point. Not very many people can do that. All right. I probably will fail at doing it. But right before he died, he was talking when he was starting to really get sick, right? It might have been about a year before he dies, actually. He's being interviewed. And he couldn't go to the studios anymore because of his treatments, and he was too sick, and he was vomiting all the time, and he was losing lots of weight and all this. And you could see that, he's coughing up a lot, and, sometimes phlegm and blood would come up. So he's dying, all right? But, journalists would come in, BBC was coming into his home, that he had a home in DC, in Washington, DC. And he was by his bookshelf, and he was not only a prolific writer, but he was a prolific reader. And he tackled some major issues, like, why is Orwell's important today? Why, he really attacked. I mean, he attacked Kissinger, he attacked Clinton, he attacked that saint, Mother Teresa. So, he really went after people. But he said that he wanted to be able to be, with all this knowledge that he gained with reading and his experience in journalism, that he was able to get to a point of, and I'm paraphrasing it, a level of an intellectual curiosity in philosophy, to be able to sit and actually talk through issues. And you kind of see this in his early days with C-SPAN. All right. But he wanted to do it more. And this is what he kind of wished he would be able to do, because he knew he was going to be dying. All right. So that was kind of like a regret that he had. So these characters, Kissinger and Hitchens, come and crash into each other. All right. So let's begin what you will not see anywhere else.
Henry Kissinger, the only person to be White House National Security Advisor and Secretary of State at the same time, has died. Kissinger wielded unparalleled power over U.S. foreign policy throughout the Nixon and Ford administrations.
Here is a man who has the poise, the strength, the character to serve in this great position.
We will strive not just for a pragmatic solution,
to this or that difficult, but to recognize that America has never been true to itself unless it meant something beyond itself.
And for decades after, he was a consultant and writer who offered opinions that shaped global politics and business.
Donald Trump is a phenomenon that foreign countries haven't seen. And I believe he has the possibility of going down in history as a very considerable president.
As a Jewish immigrant fleeing Nazi Germany, Kissinger spoke little English when he arrived in the United States as a teenager in 1938.
I was kind of a refugee who had to earn a living. The idea of representing the United States as a foreign-born who had to get adjusted to a new country, in fact, it's true, didn't occur.
As his political star skyrocketed, he wasn't afraid of publicity, becoming a star of the tabloids, as well as the publications that sought his ideas on geopolitics. He was known to date Hollywood actresses before marrying his second wife, Nancy, a foreign policy researcher, in 1974. Although a recipient of the Nobel Peace Prize, he was a controversial figure, in part because of policies in Cambodia, Chile, and South Asia. Critics blamed him for the 1969 secret bombing of neutral Cambodia, and at least indirectly responsible for the CIA-inspired coup that overthrew the legally elected socialist government in Chile in 1973, which Kissinger denied. They accused him of manipulating the 1974 coup that overthrew the government of Cyprus, and of supporting Pakistan's brutal campaign to quash a rebellion in what is now Bangladesh, because Pakistan was his secret conduit to the Chinese. Considered one of Kissinger's most successful achievements was the secret diplomacy that led to Richard Nixon's visit to China in February 1972, an event that reshaped the global balance of power.
Now, before we transition to Hitchens, all right, and it'll be the first ever, all right, on YouTube, and this whole montage that I'm doing. It's important to state this interplay between Kissinger and the CIA, all right, and this national security state problem that we have in the United States. You heard him making the speech, you know, that the ideals of America need to be more lofty, right? I'm paraphrasing, instead of being pragmatic, all right? But yet we see what's happening in the Israel-Hamas war as diplomacy that is pragmatic. If you really want to reach the higher level of ideals, then it's the realization of it's all about the Temple Mount and solving that problem. But unfortunately, what's happening is everything that we do is through pragmatism and not really through the true ideals. Case in point, the one state, the one China policy is just selling Taiwan down the river for a pragmatic solution to the region. So what he said is horseshit. But let's transition to Hitchens. Okay, I want to go with an old version of. I want to go with a version of Hitchens. Unfortunately, you may not be able to see this very well. He looks pretty worn out. Maybe if I bring down the video, you might be able to see it better. Yeah, looks like you. Yeah, okay. So hopefully you can see this. Now, this is when he is diagnosed with cancer and he's going through chemotherapy and he's losing his hair. Probably is about 6 months to 8 months before, probably about 6 months before he dies.
What would you do if Henry Kissinger decided to call you and try to bury the hatchet after all these years?
That'd be extremely interesting. But one of the reasons I detest him is I sort of know that couldn't happen. He wouldn't even agree when I was writing my book about him to have questions submitted in writing, let alone to meet me. He's made it a condition when he appears on television programs that he not be asked about the book. I know this from the producers, several of them. He made it a condition of his appearance at the National Press Club, which I don't think should have agreed that he not be asked about the book. Never mind his attitude to me. There's no reason to like me, but I mean, I would have pretended, if I was him, I'd have pretended, who's this guy Hitchens? I don't care. But I know I needled him. But more important, if you think of the things he's been found out as having done, lying about Vietnam, lying about Chile, Bangladesh, East Timor, the deaths of so many people needlessly for the vanity of himself and his criminal prison. We have other people from that period in our history, Robert McNamara, the Bundy brothers, others, William Colby, who, in their books and their memoirs, tried to make some kind of restitution. They said, actually, this was pretty bad policy. We sort of suspected at the time that it was bad, maybe worse, and we're sort of sorry. And actually, we have some evidence we feel we should share with you. Some disclosures that you should have had at the time. It made so much. Kissinger's never said a word of self-criticism, not one. And he gets very petulant and angry and spoiled and ugly when he's criticized. So, as Jeeves says in another context, Bertie, the contingency is a remote one. But if he was to try it, I'd be.
So that's Hitchens probably about 6 months before he dies. Okay, talking about Kissinger. That was just a really quick clip. Now what I want to do is play a younger version of Hitchens. Obviously, he does these, this, for some reason, these older videos, they don't really show up well. Hopefully, okay, this will, okay. Now, this is on C-SPAN. This is in 2001, okay? Hitchens dies in I think it's 2014. I should know that. I think it's 2014 when he dies. It was in December. So it's coming up. I think it was December 15th. Let's look that up. We're doing live, all right? So, Hitchens. Oh, he died in he died in December of 2011. So he died a year after my brother died. Okay, so we will play Hitchens. Old Hitchens, all right? Old video of Hitchens, let's put it that way. In 2001.
Tracy and Christopher Hitchens, what do you think so far?
Good grief. Couldn't we have a honeymoon about that? I mean, not that to be honeymoon minded, but I mean,
we can talk about Henry Kissinger.
Much better. I mean, I'll say it as a salute to the re-entry of the Republican Party to Washington, especially its old military wing. Harper's Magazine has, for your dilatation, spread a great feast. And I was hoping we might just say a word about that before.
You can say anything you want. This is the cover of the magazine has.
Of course, Kissinger did not, when they kindly agreed to run a long piece by me, actually, the first two on this. We didn't know, of course, it was going to be taking over Washington this week.
What's the point of this piece?
The point of this piece is to try and do justice to Kissinger and to try and do justice to his victims and to try and point out to people who think that, didn't we do this once before? Haven't we been into allegations about his past record? That in fact, the law nationally and internationally has somewhat changed. The context in which
great men and statesmen and potentates can treat people as disposable.
What's the charge?
has
What's your
changed.
charge?
Charges war crimes and crimes against humanity.
When did you get this idea?
Well, I've long had the impression that that could be said about him, at least morally or metaphorically. What I'm trying to argue here is that in the context that has evolved post-Pinochet, the stripping of immunity from the dictator in Chile, and the context that's evolved post-Milosevic, in other words, the decision by the international community to become seized of the idea of war crimes and crimes against humanity and to hold people responsible, bring them to justice.
What's the crime? Name your charge.
In the case of, well, I have in this opening stage, I have two. One you might say was micro, one was macro. The macro one is Vietnam. It's the deliberate extension of the war in Indochina, deliberate extension of it in two ways. First, the attempt by the Nixon team, which involved Mr. Kissinger in 1968, to undermine the peace negotiations of President Johnson and Vice President Humphrey in Paris by going to the South Vietnamese side and urging them to boycott the negotiations on the promise of a better deal from the Republicans. This is a story you've probably heard in one version or another around the town over the years, but it's become a much harder and firmer story with successive evolutions. And I think I could claim that it's told here all in one piece, at any rate for the first time, though I've used the work of many other hands to do so. That's the first way the war was extended. The second was to extend it to Cambodia and to Laos by illegal, secret, mass, indiscriminate bombardment of civilians with the knowing and intended result.
Why all these?
Damaging the civilian population. Now that was already illegal under the Nuremberg Code, but it's, so to speak, much more illegal now.
Why this all these many years later do you write about this?
Well, as I say, because since General Pinochet's immunity was stripped from him, first by the initiative of the Spanish magistrate, and then by the British House of Lords, and now increasingly, this week, in fact, in the Chilean courts themselves, and since the setting up of the Rome Statute, as the International War Crimes Tribunal is now called, and the indictment of Slobodan Milosevic and his equipe, his aides, we're in a position to revisit some people who were thought invulnerable, who live right here in our own midst. And the Pinochet matter, I think, may be the crucial one, which is part two.
Was it your idea, or was it Harper's Magazine's idea that they could do this?
Now, let me just interject, all right, because this is a Hitchens moment for Dr. Paul Cottrell, all right? It's important to kind of understand the history of what happened, obviously, in Cambodia and in Vietnam, but how it has echoed through U.S. policy even up to today, and this national security state that feels as though they can do whatever they want. And how Hitchens brings up the point, well, that was back in the 60s and the 70s. This was being recorded in 2001. Why rehash it? The idea is that you can shine a light on these people that were tied into the national security state and hold them accountable. This is exactly what needs to happen with the crisis that we just went through, with the people that were involved in funding the production of biologics, the ones that were doing the war planning for the biologics, the ones that were actually doing the designing and research on them, the ones that were on the shield side and on the sword side, all of them. And some of the people that we're talking about need to be held accountable, the truthers and these individuals that, are, holding some of these doctors in high esteem were part of the program. We know who they are. I don't need to mention their names, but they become celebrity doctors trying to make a buck, especially in some sort of class action lawsuit, against big pharma, and build up notoriety as some sort of savior and say that they're, part of some sort of bioethicist, group. Meanwhile, they had no ethics when they were collecting a check as a consultant working for the whole biologic weapons apparatus. So what we're seeing here with Kissinger and the re-indictment of Kissinger in 2001 by Hitchens, right? And maybe even the, after the death indictment of Kissinger, right? This can be applied to these celebrity docs like Malone. There's not much of a difference. Kissinger made a lot of money as a consultant. Kissinger gained a lot of notoriety in the media sphere. How's that any different than Malone? So we can use this Hitchens point, this Hitchens moment, and hold people that were involved in the biologics apparatus of the United States and hold them accountable instead of paying for their notoriety, literally. I mean, he literally has monetized you because he's saying things that you like hearing, even though he was part of why we have the catastrophe that we have. He's not the only one. Redfield, Burks, our famous Italian. There were many people involved that needed to be held accountable, and they never will be. But we have this chance to apply the Hitchens point. Again, you've never heard that on YouTube before. Once again, another first. Another first. Pay attention to the celebrity docs. They're trying to monetize you, and they are trying to whitewash their involvement with this whole situation that we just went through. It goes all the way back pre-2019, their involvement. Back to Hitchens.
Yes. We had a discussion about a year or so ago and decided it was time to have a crack at it.
Did Henry, excuse me, did Henry Kissinger talk to him?
He didn't.
Did you try to talk to him?
Sure did. I even offered him money. Well, he's a very expensive guy. As you know, if you want to get Henry Kissinger to talk, you have to offer him a big speaker's fee. And when he didn't reply the first time, we said, well, look, name your price. We're not rich, but we'll try and
How much were you prepared to pay him?
Well, I said we'd pay him what an average Nightline would pay him, because he's been on Nightline with Ted Koppel now upwards of several hundred times, and there are still some very important questions he's never been asked. I said, if you'll agree to answer the questions Ted Koppel doesn't ask you, we'll pay. We can probably run to a Nightline rate.
So Nightline pays him to go on there.
They used to. I'm sure they still do. He was an official news consultant. Mr. Cottrell once refused to tell me how much he was actually paid. Can I just let the other shoe drop on the micro thing in this piece?
Let me grab this call and we'll come back to it. Okay. Mineola, New York, on the Democratic line for Christopher Hitchens.
Calls already.
Hi, Christopher, and I'd like to say it's great for C-SPAN to be reporting so many different aspects of everything. My question regarded that I'd never heard of anything in regards to Mr. Kissinger before in any of the media or on any front line, anything like that. And I was wondering why it's taking so long to come out on something like that then.
Well, I say in my introduction, actually, that one of the things about Mr. Kissinger is his very successful diplomacy with the press. He's not a very successful diplomat, in my judgment, on other fronts and in other matters. Greatly overrated reputation, point of fact. But he has managed to get his column syndicated through the Los Angeles Times, and it appears in our hometown here in the Washington Post. He's been a consultant to ABC and I think NBC at this time. He's very frequently referred to on television. He's usually referred to as a referee rather than as a participant. In other words, he's the independent expert. It's not as if he's ever taken any side or any stand or has any interest of his own. Though in fact, his consulting firm continues to make and reap a tremendous profit from some, in my opinion, very questionable things that he did while he was in office, and through the generosity of some extremely dubious clients, such as the dictatorship in China and the entourage of General Pinochet in Chile.
Chico, California, Republican line for Christopher Hitchens, excuse me. Go ahead, Cuba.
Yeah, I think it's kind of a disgrace for C-SPAN to have this man on masquerading as a journalist.
That's more like
he's taking part in probably what is the most vicious and outrageous smear campaign I've ever heard several years ago against a patriot, William Casey, and at least Gary Sick had the grace to disappear and not show his face anymore. The only question I would ask is, have you apologized to William Casey's family?
By no means, no. Mr. Casey doesn't deserve an apology from anybody. As you know, if he hadn't died when he did, he would almost certainly have been indicted for his part in the grotesque circumvention of the Constitution that was involved in the Iran-Contra matter, which, if you insist on reading it up, which I'm happy you do, I remind you, involved raising a private budget, which is strictly illegal, for conducting a secret foreign policy to circumvent Congress on two very important matters, Iran and Nicaragua, and involved raising that money from the shadiest middlemen in the drug and illegal weapons and hostage trading branches of international crime. So Mr. Casey was one of the supervisors of that, was probably lucky to die when he didn't, have no worse said about him in his own hearing. So,
Chico, you want to respond?
in brief, no, I don't.
So it's important. You know, this is going all the way back to 2001, and this argument about this main theme of the national security state doing things they shouldn't be doing. You fast forward to 23 years, right? And you know, you have release of biologics, and you have these unconventional warfare mechanisms that are now in place, and they're going to get worse. See, people need to start paying attention to what I have to say, because everything that I've been saying is profound. I mean, literally profound. And where this is going and how it's going to evolve. And if people don't pay attention, you're gonna have a rough time in terms of boosting up your health, in terms of, preparing for this transition that is taking place, the importance of taking down the national security state, this change in the Middle East that's happening, the high potentiality of a major naval conflict in the Asian theater between the United States and China over Taiwan. I mean, people need to wake up. But you'll listen to stupid people like, I wouldn't say, you'll listen to people that said they know so much, on YouTube for the last 10 years, right? That they're going to tell you the story. And they got one of the biggest events in history in the last 125 to 150 years that we just went through, got almost all of it wrong. And couldn't warn you like I did. All right. What Hitchens is saying here is really profound. You got to knock out the national security state. And a big part of that, especially during the 60s and 70s, came right out of Harvard. Part of the problem is Harvard. Even though I got my master's degree there.
Proposed to apologize for that.
Yeah, Mr. Hitchens accused Casey of treason by getting the Ayatollah Khomeini to keep the American hostages held. Totally disproven by congressional committee.
Not disproven at all. Not disproven. That I would consider still to be an open question. I think Mr. Casey tried very hard to get that done. And I think it will one day be firmly established that he did.
Let's go to Peoria, Illinois next for Christopher Hitchens. Good morning.
I think the American people have been misled into believing that Richard Nixon ended the war in Vietnam. Actually, like it was just recently reported in the newspapers, like 60,000 demonstrators at his inaugural back then. And there was a Christmas bombing just prior to the inaugural celebration and after his election. And actually, it was the Democrats in Congress who caucused and voted to end the funding for Vietnam that actually twisted his arm enough to make him go to the conference table on the peace treaty. There was enough strength shown election district by congressional district for delegates to the Democratic National Convention for McGovern. That the Democratic congressmen knew they were next on the line. But if they didn't vote to end funding for the war, their jobs would go. And the next primary season, they would be up against just opposition in many congressional districts will be voted out of office. And that's the sort of power arm twisting it took to get Nixon to sign that peace treaty.
I think that's largely true. I think one could add to it that the war had been in effect over in the minds of the political establishment. People like Robert McNamara and the others who'd originally designed it, William Colby. We have most of these people on the record. They were through with this war by 67 at the latest, 68 at the very latest. They knew that it was unwinnable. They knew they'd deceived Congress and the American people to get into it. They were looking for a way out. They had a way out in Paris in 68. And Mr. Johnson and Mr. Humphrey had both been very hawkish, were willing to take it. At that point, the South Vietnamese pull out at the last, very, very last minute, the day before the election, ruining the talks, collapsing the re-election of the Democratic ticket. And the war is persisted with for another 4 years, maybe 5, and then ended by Nixon and Kissinger on exactly the same terms, in effect, as the Democrats had been offering in Paris originally. So that what you have to imagine, this is the gravamen, if you like, of what I say in the piece, is that all the people who died in that intervening period had their lives deliberately thrown away. The calculation is, I don't have it exactly, it's in the piece, upwards of 25,000 young Americans. And we don't want to think about how many Vietnamese and Cambodians and Laotians, and they're a scuttle on actually worse terms than the Philippine Guard in Paris. So if my allegation is correct, and I'm willing to back it up in detail and at length, if it is, then the combined sabotage of the election and prolonging of that war would count, I think, as the wickedest thing any American politician had ever done.
Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, Democrat Christopher Hitchens. Good morning.
Good morning, Mr. Hitchens. I endorse your position on how the Vietnam War ended, and I'm sure you're correct on that. I looked into it in detail. But I was wondering if you feel the way I do that people like Kissinger, their influence has stretched right into today's policy. For example, in Iraq, where the people are being starved and our water supplies are disenfranchised and poisoned and everything like that. Don't you feel that there's some criminal nature here over the matter of oil, that these people have to be starved? I mean, this is as bad as Adolf Hitler, in my opinion. Thank you very much.
Well, and I don't completely agree with you there, because I think there are two distinctions. One, Mr. Saddam Hussein could feed those people if he wanted to and chooses not to. And Mr. Saddam Hussein is everything that is said about him. I mean, I've been to Iraq several times. I've been since the war. I've been in Kurdistan. I've been to towns that have been bombed by him with chemical, what was that, sat on an unexploded chemical bomb in the town of Halabja with Iraqi Air Force markings on it. I know that this stuff is not propaganda. And I've interviewed people who are still burning from what they were sprayed with. So no, I can't quite agree with you there. I wish I could, because I like your style about this, isn't it?
Are you worried at all about libel or slander?
Not in the least. No, I mean, I think it would be excellent if Mr. Kissinger was to say, look, I had defamed him, and he wanted to see me in court, because one of the matters between us is that when he left office, unlike any previous Secretary of State, he managed by a rather, I think, shady deal to take a lot of his paper with him. He's contrived to own the archive of a lot of what happened in Chile, in Vietnam, in Cyprus, in other places, while he was not just Secretary of State, but National Security Advisor and Chairman of the 40 Committee, which oversaw all of the American COVID operations.
How much legal?
So if he wants to see me in court, he'll have to go through a discovery phase, which is exactly what
How much legal
I think
work
we
did
both
that?
need and deserve. I think it's extraordinary that he's able to own so much of the public realm.
One quick one. How much legal work went into this with your lawyers?
Well, Harper's is very meticulously read by lawyers and by fact checkers for everything it does.
Hartford, Connecticut, for Christopher Hitchens. Good morning.
Yes, good morning, Mr. Hitchens.
Morning.
It's a pleasure. I'm a great admirer, sir. Before I ask my question, I hope that you'll consider writing another book about the Clintons, particularly Mrs. Clinton. I enjoyed your last one.
Well, the material seems to keep falling from the trees, but I'm steadily focused on Henry at the moment.
Okay, well, that's great too. I went through quite a period of my life considering Mr. Kissinger to be the world's most dangerous man, and
you went on.
I wonder if you, in your research, if you would be able to refresh my recollection on an incident involving a ship, a freighter, that was supposedly hijacked on the high seas and brought into Cambodia.
Yeah.
Is this familiar to you?
Sure. It wasn't a freighter. It was an American vessel called the Mayaguez. It's certainly an American registered vessel, and it was held by the Cambodian authorities just with, that's a rather polite way of referring to the Khmer Rouge. And they were the Cambodian government. They'd just taken power, in fact. In the early days of the Ford administration, and Kissinger decided, let's make this a test, let's show we can't be pushed around. And I described it, in fact, in this same edition of Harper's.
Have you ever met him?
No, I haven't. I've been in the same room. I've heard him speak. I've attended lectures by him, but no, we haven't had the pleasure. I would find it, I must say, very difficult to be social to him.
How old is he?
Right. How old is Kissinger? Old enough to know better. Over 80, I think. He's getting on.
Wakefield, Rhode Island, you're next.
What a joy it is to wake up and have Mr. Hitchens on the on C-SPAN this morning.
Hey.
His credibility is just beyond. It's just impeccable. I almost sent you the article, in fact, about Pinochet and Kissinger. This seems to be another in a long list of sort of bloodthirsty contacts from Mr. Kissinger. And I did want to second the gentleman who said, would you please consider updating the book No One Left to Lie To? And thank you very much.
Well, thank you. Can I just, would it be all right if I just said what part 2 of this?
It would be.
Housing was? Because I said there was one very macro thing. I said the whole scope of the Vietnam War and the extension of that into a war that engulfed the whole of Indochina and took the lives of innumerable civilians, and thus violated international law and the customary law of war. And the micro case I take is the case of the murder of a Chilean officer in 1970, shortly after the Allende forces had won the election in Chile. There was a general, René Schneider was his name. He was the chief of the Chilean General Staff. And he upheld the view that the Chilean army should stay out of politics. He was a constitutionalist officer. He didn't have any political views of his own, or none that are known to me or anyone else. And it was cold-bloodedly decided in Washington, excuse me, I said cold-bloodedly decided in Washington that he should be taken out, that he should be iced, that he should be killed, murdered. And meetings were held, at which Dr. Kissinger, as I keep trying not to call him, because I think it's too much of an achievement, but I don't want to call him doctor when he's only a Ph.D. Mr. Kissinger was present. At those meetings, guns were smuggled into Chile through the American diplomatic pouch and given to people who had already reputations for criminal violence in that country. In effect, a hit was planned, a mob hit was done on a constitutionally minded general in a democratic country with which the United States had no quarrel, had excellent diplomatic relations, and was not at war. Now, there is no law that allows that to be done. There's no law that says, just because I hold a position in the United States government, I can plan a murder in someone else's country. And these and other atrocities that we've uncovered from the Pinochet period in Chile are beginning to catch up to Mr. Kissinger. And as I give evidence of knowing in this article, he understands this to be true. He knows the legal position is shifting against him, and that his claims of reasons of state won't shield things that, if done by other people, would lead to their imprisonment.
This article is in the February edition, 2001 of Harper's Magazine, the case against Henry Kissinger. Christopher Hitchens, your next call is from Knoxville, Tennessee. Hello.
Yes, good morning. Mr. Hitchens, I just wanted to say I've been a long time admirer of yours. You've made me angry in the past and made me grateful, so I think you're a credit to your profession. I'm currently reading your article in Harper's. Thank you for your investigation and your writing of it. And I wanted to ask 2 questions, if I could.
Please.
First of all, have you experienced any particular professional repercussions or pressure of any sort as a result of having written this, which I believe is the first of 2 parts?
Mm-hmm.
Also, if you do, I wonder if you could comment, if you have already, I apologize, but if you could comment on the odds of Kissinger ever actually being brought to answer for his crimes, and if so, where, what venue, and in what in what respect might that happen? Thank you very much.
Right. Well, no to the first, if you mean, has anyone sort of threatened me or anything like that? No, that's not, I think, likely either. I've had a lot of people surface, so I didn't know about before. That very often happens when you write on a topic like this. You meet the people you wish you had met in the first place, but whose existence you are aware. Some people in government, some people formerly in government, have already been in touch with me with more information. So when we next revisit this matter, we'll be under good.
Something similar happened to me when going on Mike Adams' show. You know, whenever I do these larger shows, you know, there'll be people that contact me. Oh, I got information for you, you know, and I appreciate it. But, you know, I normally, you know, I normally just focus on my own research. So I'm not skewed to someone else's stuff. I will pay attention a little bit to what other people are doing, but I would say 95% of the stuff that I talk about is just my own endeavor, right? And not really collaborate. I don't like collaboration too much. You know, I feel that hinders me in going in a certain direction. But I did notice that, especially in the last show that I did, warning people about, you know, you got to shut down these weapon labs or things are going to get really bad with the fourth and the fifth cocktail. And I need to do a show about the white lung. Probably I'll do it after this. That if we don't shut down those labs, this is gonna get worse, you know. Right after that show that I did, which did, you know, there was a lot of views on that. You know, people reach out, you know, are reaching out and you know, oh, I got this information, you know, and it's like, well, thank you very much, but I mean, I'm more of a lone wolf type, you know.
Undergirded with more testimony. And just you wait for part two, by the way. How vulnerable is he legally? Well, I think in the Chilean case, I'll just confine it to that for the moment. There are a number of people in Chile, relatives of people whose lives were ended by torture or disappearance or kidnap or extrajudicial execution, including the family, indeed, of General Schneider, who was murdered on Kissinger's orders. Assassinated, I should say, on his order. Who can bring suit in the United States under the Alien Tort Claims Act and may be considering doing so now that it has been established by the Bitchute report to Congress offered by the CIA on the connection between gangsterism in Chile and named known officials in Washington, D.C. Those claims would now have standing and would have to be heard. It'd be a civil suit. It would be pressing for damages, but it would be very damaging in other ways in its presentation of evidence. That's the single likeliest way, I think, that justice can be done. I think it's a shame that one should leave it to Chilean civilians and citizens and volunteers who've already been through enough to do this. I think he should be prosecuted in the American court under American law. But the view seems to be that we only think of war criminals as foreigners, that it isn't possible that there could be one sheltering within our own borders. I'm hoping, of course, that this article helps to change that complacency.
C-SPAN 3 started today full time, and if those of you who want more C-SPAN around the country, you can go to your cable operator and tell them that it's a digital channel. That's just a way of transmitting it on your cable system. It's free to our affiliates if they get C-SPAN 1, 2, and 3. And today is the first of the 24 hours. Also in today's USA Today, elections still splits court. Joan Biscuppi reports, among other things, that Sandra Day O'Connor has told people close to her that in her 2 decades on the court, she has never seen such anger over a case. And it talks in here about some of the behind-the-scenes activities that the courts have a tough time getting back to normal. Westfield, New Jersey, for Christopher Hitchens. Hello.
Good morning.
Morning.
Mr. Hitchens, I admire you immensely. You're obviously dedicated to telling the truth, and I think that's really wonderful in this day and age. However, I have a question. I just wonder at the tendency of the media, and maybe including certain persons as yourself, with the, what's the word, you know, you have like a real desire to bring down heroes of the past. I noticed that when Clinton got caught, you know, all his friends were saying, well, the Kennedys did it, Roosevelt did it, you know, they all had mistresses and all that. And although I do admire, you know, the fact that you obviously are dedicated to finding out the truth, I'm just wondering what relevancy, this has in today's divided nation. With your talents, why couldn't you, for instance, devote yourself to exposing someone like Jesse Jackson, who has done so much to divide the nation, while at the same time, being a hypocrite, is shaking down corporations and taking money from them, because obviously these corporations are afraid of what Mr. Jackson can do. And
thanks, caller.
Well, it's hard to decline an invitation to take on the healing process, but I think I will decline also. It's not somehow what I see myself doing. And actually, I think I can cheer you up. Everyone else seems to want to volunteer to take part in the healing process. There seems to be no shortage of people who talk incessantly about unity over division. My view is that politics is division by definition, and so it's fatally foolish to talk about the politics of division as if it was a bad idea, since it's in the first place inevitable, and in the second place, in my view, desirable that people would differ. You asked me why I pick on this particular public figure. I don't pick on him. He rather forces himself upon our attention. The United States goes abroad, in my opinion, quite often correctly. It goes to the United Nations, of which it's the host country and essentially the founding member. It goes to other international bodies and insists that certain people, Mr. Milosevic, for example, and others, wanted terrorists and gangsters, be brought to justice, that they be brought within the reach of law. Fine. But if that's to be done, and it isn't just going to be done in the guise of the morality of a superpower or the self-righteousness of a superpower, then the United States must clean house and make sure that it isn't sheltering any wanted war criminals itself. In this case, this very important instance, a man whose footprint can be found in Bangladesh in the massacres of the Bengalis in the early 1970s, in justifying the Tiananmen massacre in China, probably for money, in 1989, in destabilization and assassination in Cyprus and in Chile, and above all in the titanic extension and deepening into a real war of atrocity of the war in Indochina. This is not small stuff.
From page of the LA Times, Powell intends to curb U.S. use of diplomatic sanctions. And this is a Robin Wright story this morning. We'll ask Mr. Hitchens what he thinks of this in a moment. First, New York City, you're on the air.
Good morning. I'm so glad that I got through. I just must say I love your style, Mr. Hitchens. I don't always agree with you. I'm so glad that you mentioned cyber. I was wondering if you could possibly just expand on that a little bit, just for the benefit of some viewers, because it's a subject that's been all but forgotten. I mean, it was such a travesty what occurred there, and Mr. Kissinger played a very pivotal role in that. And I just have one more comment. I would just like to say, as far as war crimes are concerned, yeah, everyone is after Mr. Milosevic, but we all very well know that there were terrible war crimes committed in the entire area. And the role that this administration, the previous administration, played in violating every international law as far as civilians were concerned. Thank you very much.
Okay. Wonder which end to start. I think we would disagree about Mr. Milosevic, as a matter of fact. I don't think that he was just one among many war criminals. It's true that the late Franjo Tuđman of Croatia was lucky to avoid indictment and might have been indicted if he'd lived. And there were other criminals too, but I think that the vast orchestration of crimes against humanity in what was Yugoslavia originates in the hysterical plan for a greater Serbia and for the reduction of the other republics to vassals of this ambition. Because I think that necessitated ethnic cleansing and all the cruelty and violence that go with. However, we obviously both share a feeling about Cyprus, and I'll be brief if I may, because that's part of the second tranche of what Harper's is going to print and won't be out until the March issue. But briefly,
when's that coming out?
You could, it'll be out, where are we now?
January 22nd?
Yes, the Harper's is on the newsstands now, part one. The February one, so in a month from now, you'll get
a whole month, or I mean, you're talking 3 weeks?
Well, probably, it depends somewhat. I wish I knew more precisely. I think we count ourselves on the newsstands on the 23rd of each month, but in big cities, it's usually earlier, and for subscribers, it'll be sooner. But just not to step on my story or on what the magazine has in store. But look, Cyprus can have a claim to being the other democracy in the Middle East, if you like. It's anchored just off Israel, Palestine, Lebanon, Syria, that coast. Democratic country, elected president, an archbishop, as a matter of fact, Greek Orthodox Archbishop Makarios, for many years, since its independence in 1960, targeted by Dr. Kissinger, who in his memoirs says, I've called a doctor again, it's a tick, I keep trying to repudiate this sort of subliminal propaganda of it. Mr. Kissinger says in his memoirs that the problem with Cyprus was that it had this democratically elected president who wouldn't always do what he was told. In particular, would not do what he was told by the military dictatorship in Greece, of which Henry Kissinger was then a great patron and defender and supporter. And briefly, I argue, I don't argue it briefly, but I'll summarize it briefly, that there was a plan simply to have the Archbishop removed, and the only way to do that was to cut him down with gunfire, which was tried, which failed, but in its failure provoked a terrible war, the terrible civil war among Greek Cypriots, and gave the opportunity for an invasion by Turkey of the northern half of the island, which turned into an occupation, an ethnic cleansing, and a colonization, which persists to this day.
West Hyattsville, Maryland, on the Democratic line. You're on with Christopher Hitchens.
Hi, I wanted to say how much I admire your writing skill and your willingness to come forward to speak about these hard issues. But the question I had was, would you comment on how and why Kissinger and his co-workers could perpetrate such a deception or fraud knowingly for so long about the war?
About the Vietnam War?
Yes.
Well, it took a long time for the documents to come out. It does in this culture in Washington. People have to develop the conscience and testify. Some documents remain under seal for a very long time. For example, Mr. Kissinger and I had a dispute recently, which I think I won, in the letters column of the New York Times Book Review. I've been reviewing Anthony Summers' book, very excellent new study of the Nixon years. Mr. Summers in his book has only just now got the files that show that, and the transcripts, the photographic record of the transcripts of the FBI's bugging of the Nixon campaign, which was ordered by President Johnson in 1968, because they suspected that the Nixon team was making an illegal contact with a foreign government to try and subvert the Paris negotiations. And the Logan Act, to give you a bit of a fill-in, makes that a very illegal thing for an American to do, as well as obviously a very wicked thing for a presidential candidate to be doing in the middle of a war and a negotiation and an election. Anyway, though the Johnson people don't like to admit it, they did bug the Nixon campaign, and they did find that that contact was going on. There was illegal and unauthorized contact, and Summers has the transcripts. Now, but I've always thought that would be found out, but I only now can say I've looked at the proof of it in the last 3-4 months. So that's why it takes so long.
Are there other war criminals?
And you see, if you don't have evidence like that and you talk the way I'm talking, I can tell you what happens. You get accused of being a conspiracy theorist, of being a paranoid, and so on. And you have to be extremely meticulous. But we can now say that attentat, that sort of internal coup d'etat in the United States, did take place.
Are there other war criminals, in your opinion, besides Henry Kissinger, in regard to the Vietnam War?
Well, you make me sound as if I'm the judge of all this, and in this sort of Solonic position.
But in your sense,
yes, I mean, the difference being this: people like Robert McNamara, William Colby, who wrote Honorable Men, the Bundy brothers, and so on, who were architects of that war and did know of terrible things and did conceal their knowledge of them from the public, have tried to make an atonement. I mean, I don't know whether Robert McNamara would call himself a war criminal, but he certainly feels he has a very bad conscience about what he did and also about what he said.
About Lyndon Johnson.
And there's every evidence that Mr. Johnson went to his grave extremely oppressed by the thought of what he'd done, how many people had died as a result. The difference in the case of Henry Kissinger is this: he's the only one of the people who had any part in really keeping that war going, and extending it and deepening it and running it intimately, and knowing very, very well indeed how many people were being slaughtered, who's never made the smallest act of contrition, never attempted the tiniest bit of accounting or accountability, and only shows any indignation, even any pulse of emotion of any sort, when his own reputation is impugned, as it now has been.
Lakeland, Florida, Republican for Christopher Hitchens.
Yes, you've been talking about the past. Oh, praise be for C-SPAN. But you've been talking about the past. Let's talk about the future a little bit. In the U.S. Senate, who is going to be the Republican spokesman for foreign policy? Is it going to be Jesse Helms or Richard Lugar? I want African Americans to come and rally for Richard Lugar. because Jesse Helms takes over and is the spokesman, it's going to be hell to play. And so African Americans, please come to the rally of Richard Lugar to be the chief Republican spokesman in the U.S. Senate in the future. And Mr. Hitchens, would you look into this and promote this idea? Because Jesse Helms cannot be the spokesman Republican for this country. I'd be ashamed for him to be the Republican Senate spokesman for foreign policy.
Thanks.
I think I'm entitled to take this as a comment. Look, things are not so bad that I'm going to have to decide who's the Republican spokesman on foreign affairs, but I should say that Madeleine Albright seemed to think that Jesse Helms was the spokesman not just for the Republican Party in the Senate, but for the Senate itself. So I don't think very much has changed on that score.
Lexington, Kentucky. Hello.
Good morning, Mr. Hitchens.
Good morning.
2 questions for you.
Mm-hmm.
First,
you're a long way from home.
Yes, I'm rather a long way from home. You're a controversial writer, by American standards anyway. You've written your book, No One Left Alive, seemed to take you off the screens, talk shows for quite a while.
Well, I'm back.
Yes, I was very glad to see you back on Skype actually, but I wonder whether you could speak to the fact that this is, the freedom of the press, okay? The freedom of the press over here is not, perhaps they don't have the freedom that they think they have, okay? I know you did get slammed by a couple of newspapers in England for that book. I mean, you weren't,
I think they have, well...
I think the Guardian wrote,
You said 2 questions. I was saying, could you condense a bit? You said you had 2.
Yes, the second one was just, is Peter Hitchens related to you?
Peter's my younger brother.
Did you
There's one Tory in every family. Well, actually, I don't know. Sometimes there's more than one Tory in every family when you go to Britain. He's written just an extremely good statement of the right-wing Tory case, I must say, in which Brian was talking to him about on book notes recently. But one person who will forgive me if I don't promote this book will be Peter, I think.
Do you feel
promote my own stuff?
Were you taken off of this show because of your?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I was about to say, if there are restrictions on the freedom of the press or the liberty of expression in this country, you couldn't prove it by me. I've been incredibly well treated, very generously treated in America. I sometimes feel enough unpublished thoughts. I could probably appear on radio or TV much more often than I do if I said yes every time. And the same with scribbling. So maybe I'm spoiled, but I try and make the most of it. And I think the answer to your question would be that there's no theoretical limit on how much can be said and contemplated and cogitated and published here at all. I just do think that not enough advantage is taken by those who have this amazing privilege of it. Very often, people sit on things or downplay them or de-emphasize them. And very often they do this because they feel that, well, they have a responsibility to consensus or to healing or to unity and the other things with which I was being tempted earlier on, if you were watching.
In 22 minutes, where it will be 6 a.m. in Seattle, Portland, San Francisco, San Diego, Los Angeles, way on the West Coast. We have somewhat East Coast centric here.
Yes.
We will have Tony Blankley as our guest, but for the moment, Christopher Hitchens, we go to Los Angeles. You're next.
Hello.
Hi, you're on the air.
Yes, I've heard a theory about Mr. Kissinger that back in the 60s, I think it was, that Turkey was sort of blackmailing the United States. We were going to kick us out of their country. We couldn't renew our contracts with our air bases there and our listening posts into Russia. And so Kissinger and Nixon went to the Shah of Iran, made a deal with him to put in listening posts up in their northern part of their country. And anyway, the Shah said, well, I'd like to have a modern air force. And Nixon and Kissinger said, sure, okay, we'll sell you some. And then the Shah said, well, I don't have the wherewithal to purchase that. And then he, I don't know which side, suggested to start OPEC so they could increase the cost of the oil per barrel. It was like about $2 or $3 a barrel back then. And then 10 years later, it went up to $30 a barrel. And I was wondering if you'd like to comment on that, if you know anything about that. I'll hang up now.
Well, I would caution you from experience against any explanation that appears to explain too much, as yours does. I think that's resting too much mega development on a small one. Something of what you say is certainly true. There was a shift, a sort of insurance policy was taken out on the Pahlavi dynasty, the Shah's family, because of concern about stability in Turkey. Very exorbitant arms sales were made to Iran, and big kick the Nixon-Kissinger campaign by some of the people who profited from those arms sales, which were probably many of them extremely unwise, and certainly helped to develop the Pahlavi regime into a military dictatorship. Also helped to fuel what later became the Iran-Iraq war, in which an uncounted number of people perished pointlessly. And yes, it's true that Kissinger was always a defender of the Shah, always covered up for him, always defended him against the truthful allegations that he employed a large staff of full-time professional torturers, which he most certainly did, and drove most intelligentsia out of Iran. It certainly counts against Kissinger that he was so involved in all that, but that was so much a general policy of a larger wing of the American establishment at the time, before it imploded in '79, that you can't really blame it all on him, in fairness. And as far as I know, it didn't break any international laws or violate any local ones either. So I have a glancing mention only of his skullduggery in that region, and of another aspect of it, which you may remember, which was his betrayal of the Kurdish people. But I think we're straying a little now.
I need your quick take on another story. The Philadelphia Inquirer's lead today as Mideast begins lengthy talks. Israelis and Palestinians are pessimistic about forging a peace treaty. And right below that is this story in the Baltimore Sun. Israelis turn to warrior Sharon, Eric Sharon, and all the articles is being portrayed as the next prime minister of Israel. What impact will that have, and do you think it will have?
Well, to the second half of your question, it seems as if he's a sure thing to be elected, unless there's a switch in the Labour leadership at the last minute, which apparently Israeli electoral law allows. That's to say, Sharon beats Barak, apparently on doesn't matter how you measure it.
What if there's a deal?
He wouldn't beat Perez.
What if there's a deal between now and then on this peace stuff?
Well, I don't think anyone's going to sign a deal until they know.
Who's the next?
Because I'll tell you why. The Sharon has said he won't honour any deal Barak signs. The Likud has already said that. So the Palestinians know that. They're not going to sign either. That seems to me, and now we know what Mr. Clinton was really doing in the last few weeks when he was in office. He was negotiating his own pardon strategy instead of paying attention to these matters. It won't happen until the election's over. I think it would be a calamity if General Sharon became the prime minister of anywhere. Because I recently reread the Kahana Commission report, the Israeli government report on the massacres at Sabra and Shatila. It's a remarkably lenient document, by the way. It's much less critical, and I think much less rigorous than it's often represented as being. But at the very minimum, the very least you can say about this guy is that he stood with his hands on his hips and his binoculars and his boots, looking at a mound of human corpses, which he didn't find objectionable at all.
There is a long piece in this week's New Yorker about Ariel Sharon, and the author of the piece spent some time on his thousand-acre farm.
Let me just cut in. I find it fascinating going all the way from 2001 to now, and them talking about things about Kissinger and how the conversation tangentially went right to Israel. Remember what I said earlier in this video, that the things that were going on with the national security state and the policies that were being made way back in the 50s are echoing and affecting us today. And there's been a can being kicked year after year for basically 75 years, but I've been really more focused on the last 50 years, right? But that has led us to the problem that we have today with the Israeli-Hamas war. Now, again, I appreciate the style of Hitchens, but I don't agree with everything he says. All right, and this is the point that he was saying about Sharon. Sharon has been on record saying that he had the opportunity when he was, I'm not sure if it was the Yom Kippur War or if it was the war before that. It might have been the Yom Kippur War, where Arafat was in his sights and that he chose not to kill him. All right. He didn't mention that. Now, if Sharon did not make that mistake and did kill Arafat, the PLO wouldn't have constituted like it did. because Arafat was the key. Sharon decided for not going after him and killing him, but he had the opportunity to kill him. Bitchute doesn't bring that up. All right. So there was a moment of grace that Sharon had on the battlefield with Arafat. All right. And I think many people would have said that Arafat should have been eliminated back then, and things would have been better. Another point to be made here, if this was the Yom Kippur War, all right, so in 73, it might have been, I think it is the Yom Kippur War, in 73, then you had very famous rabbis at the time saying, you have to get the job done. And you're being attacked, and you need to get the job done and be forceful. But what happened was that Israel placated to international pressure and gave land back. And this start in motion some of the problems that we have today. I mean, you really want to go back to the real genesis of this. This is this battle between Jacob and Esau in the biblical text, and that Jacob that Esau should have been eliminated much earlier, right? So there is this, the past is affecting the future. Here's the thing, again, the past is affecting the future, but also the future is wrapped in and affecting the past. The future is also affecting the past. We are in a circle. We're in a circle of time. It's circular, not always linear. And I'm not sure if it's like linear for a little while and unravels. It's linear for a while and then it wraps, or is it always circular? I don't know. I haven't really thought that deeply about it. But there are at the very minimum times when the timeline will circle on itself, like a wormhole in a way, using kind of physics, where the past is and the future are connected bidirectionally, not unidirectionally. So it's just fascinating. This whole thing that I'm doing is about Kissinger, right? And the perspectives that Hitchens has on Kissinger, but these tangential points on how it affects the Middle East, how it's affecting current affairs, the current news cycle that we're in right now with the whole Israeli Hamas war, and why I keep on taking the stance that if you look at the whole arc of history here on this, the total elimination of Hamas, Hezbollah, and Iran is the answer for a permanent peace in that region and the rebooting of the temple. But you'll have intellectuals, and Hitchens is one of the intellectuals that will try to apply some sort of Westphalian concept to something that is been written for thousands of years, that this is the land of the Jews, and it's through a covenant between the Jewish people and God, and that it is non-breaking. The Jewish people cannot break it. God cannot break it. There is an unbreakable bond, that covenant with that land. And the Israelis were attacked. And then some people will say, well, the Palestinians, they have the right to the land. Israel's taking it away from them. No, they don't have the right to the land. They're not part of the covenant. See, this is the thing. This is the essence of the problem is that non-Jews don't understand that land is the ownership of the Jewish people, period. Period. Full stop. And once you realize that, then you can fix the problem.
Or ranch, whatever they call it in Israel. I think it may be the biggest landowner, individual landowner in Israel. Defiance, Ohio, are you there?
Yes, sir, I am.
You're on with
Defiance, Ohio.
You're on with Christopher Hitchens.
How wonderful.
Yes, sir, Mr. Hitchens.
Good morning.
You over at the Nation have a very subjective way of looking at things.
You come along here and you attack Henry Kissinger, and if, by the way, he is guilty, he should be prosecuted. So yet I hear nothing from the nation or anyone else on the left about David Bonnier and Richard Gephardt and Maxine Waters during the 1980s who went down and gave aid and comfort to Daniel Ortega and his ilk in direct violation of the Logan Act. Why is the discrepancy here?
Let me see. Where to begin with that? Well, first, it's Harper's Magazine that's very kindly agreed to publish my findings, my allegations and findings, my evidence about Kissinger. So make sure that Oscar Harper's on the newsstand this month and next. Second, I don't think any charge was ever brought or even suggested against a congressman who went to visit Nicaragua. And I don't think that the Logan Act charge would have held against them either. So that's the answer to that.
Still there, Defiance?
They were violating the State Department regulations. They had already passed regulations in the mid-1980s that they were to not go anywhere near or have anything to do with.
I'm sorry, that's false. I was there at the time myself. State Department can't tell a congressman he or she can't visit a neighboring country. And you would not, I hope, coming as you do from Defiance, Ohio, approve of a State Department that even tried to arrogate that sort of power to itself. So I think you have it all wrong, as a matter of fact.
Caller, go ahead.
I said my brother was in the Vietnam War, yes, and he received 2 Purple Hearts and a Bronze Star. But I'm just saying, if you're going to go after someone like Kissinger and show documents where he violated the law, you should also go after the other side. I mean, fair is fair here. What happened to this bipartisan stuff we were supposed to be hearing after the election?
I think you've already heard my opinion about that.
Detroit, Michigan, you're next.
Yes, good morning. I'm glad to see you on C-SPAN. Mr. Hitchens, my 2 questions. Do you really think that the public's going to be up in arms over Kissinger when Ronald Reagan and Oliver North in the Contra affair was such an atrocity and such a cover-up? The other thing, to answer your question about freedoms not being taken advantage of here in the States, and I think it comes down to apathy, and we take for granted everything that we have. Thank you.
Well, I'd be sorry to think that the last was true, and I think the evidence is that it's not, in fact, not meaning to flatter my host or the C-SPAN 3, congratulations, by the way. It seems to me that this network is evidence to the contrary. I didn't quite get the force of your first point, but it seemed to be similarly fatalistic. Again, I'm willing to try that on. My bet is that when people become aware of the fact that the standards that the United States claims to represent in the enforcement of human rights and international law generally are violated by this egregious case within its own borders, that something may be done to redress it, to do some justice to the victims, as well as to the perpetrator, and to clean up and update our historical record, our knowledge of our own recent past and the workings of our institutions. Can't say any of that is boring or dry or uncontroversial or unlikely to kindle as an issue. I think it has every chance to kindle it.
Way off topic. This little note in today.
I'm going to go to commercial because this is PNN. Please go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com, and get the deodorants that we have produced. Rainbow Herbals has, created this awesome deodorant bar. It's made from essential oils from the Himalayas. This one happens to be citrus scent. I also have peppermint lavender scent. So please go to the store, the-studio-reykjavik.com. Link is in the description of this video to get this deodorant bar. Because of the high quality of the ingredients, it also helps with detoxification. It's going to be the best deodorant bar that you can buy. Good night formula. This will help you get those 3 REM cycles that you need so you have proper sleep and proper detoxification of your cells. It's very important. So please go to the store and take Good Night formula. Take it. You can take it every day, right? And you're going to actually, by having proper sleep over a long period of time, because of the detoxification effects and getting into the REM cycles, you're actually age slower. Structural nanosilver, it neutralizes pathogens. So please go to the store. I have 5 different versions of this soap. So please go to the store, the-studio-reykjavik.com, and get a few bars of the structural nanosilver soap. I have the best toothpaste that you can buy. It's structural nanosilver toothpaste. It does not have any fluoride. It'll whiten your teeth, freshen your breath, neutralize pathogens, reduce gum inflammation, and by doing this, you're going to improve your cardiovascular health. Poor oral hygiene is going to increase your chances of cardiovascular disease and valvular disease. Take this toothpaste. It's way better than anything that Alex Jones sells. Go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com, and get a few tubes of this. Go to my store also and get magnesium and zinc. You need this to boost up your immune system. If you're sick, take a double dose of this. You need to take this every day. This is going to help with your immune system. Go to my store. Lignans, it's a powder. It helps to boost up your immune system. It also helps with hormonal health for males and females. I take this every day. What you do is it's a powder, so you can mix it with water, or I put it in hummus. I have homemade hummus every afternoon. So I put it in the hummus. You can put it in a smoothie. So it's an important product to take every day, all right, to boost up your immune system. By boosting up your immune system, you're going to be able to fight cancer better. Silver gel. All right. This is a great skincare product. It's in a dispenser, so you can carry it around in your bag. It helps neutralize pathogens. You put it on your hands. It'll be active for 5 hours. You can put it around your mouth and around your nose, lightly coat your nostrils, around your eyes, lightly coat your ear canal, and it will neutralize pathogens. Some of the ways that pathogens get into your system is through the mouth, nose, and eyes and ears, right? So this helps to reduce that. So if you're in the cold season, take this. Not only that, you can use this as a skincare product. It'll help to heal a wound. It heals the wound about 1/3 of the time quicker. It helps with acne. If you put it on your skin every night, keep it on your skin while you're sleeping, and then you exfoliate in the morning, then what you'll notice is that your skin is improving. I have a very easy to digest multivitamin. You need multivitamins because they're cofactors for the enzymes that you need for proper cellular processing. So please go to my store and get this multivitamin. It's the-studio-reykjavik.com. Link is in the description.
Today's New York Post headline is Hill bumped off Prez jet and given a coach pass. Vince Morris writes, Senator Hillary Rodham Clinton, who kissed goodbye the comforts of Air Force One when her husband relinquished his job over the weekend, will now be traveling like the rest of us on coach. Aides to Clinton, who marked yesterday as the first time in 8 years she awoke without her First Lady mantle, says she decided to travel between New York home and the nation's capital, probably on a shuttle and not by private jet. She hasn't decided if she's going to fly or take the train, her spokesman Howard Wilson said yesterday. When she decides, we'll let you know.
I'm willing to wait.
Is it a big issue?
I can be patient about it.
Shreveport, you're on.
Hello.
Hi.
Yes, big fan of C-SPAN and Christopher Hitchens. I'm a kind of a rare bird here. I'm a Southerner, and I'm very, actually down here I'm moderate, but everybody thinks I'm a liberal. But I would love his opinion on what he thinks the Bush administration is going to do about labor laws, which I work for a non-union company, which is about all we have down here. And we're harassed constantly and treated like, you know what. I'm also worried about environmental laws and safety on the job. But I would love to, I'm going to hang up and I want to hear his opinion.
Well, I think the state of affairs with labor law, especially the only bit that I know anything about or studied at all, you're not coming to an expert, I'm afraid. namely the right to form a union or to try and campaign to form a union without facing the threat of dismissal or the fact of it, has needed urgent attention for some time. I read an extraordinary statistic recently, I don't have it to hand, but how many Americans last year were dismissed their jobs simply for advocating union membership, advocating having a union shop. And it's usually not worth it for a union to contest these cases because there are so many of them. It takes so long to get justice or reinstatement. So very often people decide, well, anyway, they'll go off and work somewhere else. This makes the United States very unusual among developed capitalist countries in making the onus so heavily on those who think that their job should be unionized and have union scale and protection.
I wanted to ask you about that.
But I don't think you can look, given how little attention the Clinton administration, the Clinton Labor Department paid to that, I don't suppose you can look for very much better luck from the incomers.
In this story about Colin Powell, it says, Robin Wright writes, that Secretary of State Colin Powell is about to launch a quiet revolution in American diplomacy by proposing to scrap many, maybe even most of the punitive sanctions imposed by the United States. The vast majority over the last decade, she writes. And then she says about 75 of the world's nearly 200 countries are currently subject to U.S. sanctions. Several have been sanctioned for multiple offenses ranging from mislabeling cans of tuna at one end of the scale to engaging in egregious human rights violations and narcotics trafficking at the other.
It's interesting. Does Robin Wright, I don't used to know study, does she instance any particular countries? Those are cases rather than countries she's talking about.
Well, she goes into some about all the different, like Iraq and
yes.
Countries like that. But she says that Powell's proposed reversal would be a boon to American business. USA Engage, a coalition of more than 670 U.S. companies committed to easing embargoes, estimates that sanctions cost the United States as much as $19 billion annually in lost exports and deprive the economy of more than 200,000 high-wage jobs. Almost half of the 125 unilateral economic sanctions imposed by the United States since World War I were initiated from 93 to 98, according to surveys by USA Engage.
That's interesting. It reminds me to say I was amazed. I didn't know that the general was on 52 corporate boards until this confirmation hearing.
So only one was for profit.
Only one for profit, but I was impressed that he said he would be recusing himself on a case-by-case basis as if, the State Department will still be flipping through the Fortune 500 to see which bits the secretary can deal with.
Davenport,
it looks as if they have some business input into this.
I think there's a major problem, right? And this is tied into the whole national security problem, national security state issue and deep state and all this, is how these fucking generals that don't win a fucking war go onto these damn boards and, are taking their connections and their power and monetizing it. I think it's wrong. I don't think they should be able to be on a board.
This sanction decision.
Davenport, Iowa, you're on with Christopher Hitchens.
Hi, Christopher. I was wondering your thoughts on the Jonathan Pollard case. And from my understanding, Clinton was going to pardon him, but the head of the CIA said he quit. And that's my question. Thanks.
I was reliably told that at the Y agreement, which is now, I think, 2 years ago, the meeting with then Prime Minister Netanyahu and Mr. Clinton, that Mr. Netanyahu said that he wanted to take Pollard back with him to Jerusalem on the plane, and Clinton agreed until George Tenet, head of the CIA, who I know this has been re-upped by President Bush, said he would walk that. Yeah, I believe that to be true. I realized that Mr. Pollard wasn't going to get pardoned once the election was over, because the only time it was likely to be pardoned before that would be for the sake of Mrs. Clinton's campaign in New York, and when she no longer needed him. I felt sorry for the guy because he's been in jail for an awfully long time and has always been tortured with the hope of pardon.
So you think he should?
Well, now they don't need him, so he's going to stay there.
You think he should be pardoned?
No, I don't say that he should be pardoned. I mean, I think what he did was obviously very grave, but he does seem to have been in jail for a very long time.
Brooklyn, New York, for Christopher Hitchens. Go ahead, please.
Go back to a commercial. So please go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com. Link is in the description, and get your turmeric. This will bring down inflammation. It's part of the anti-aging protocol. All right. Clarity factor. It will reduce that brain fog that you have and get those dendrite connections more established. And if you use this on a regular basis and you pay attention to me, you're going to have a more cognitive function through this over time. So this is a great product. It's way better than anything Alex Jones is selling. So go and get the Clarity Factor. I take this every day. You can take it in the morning. I also take it at late afternoon. So you can take it once a day or twice a day. It's up to you. But the whole point here is that you can control your connections, your neural connections, by taking products like this. And if you also get the proper sleep, do the proper diet, and do those brain exercises like reading, writing, and talking to people, right? You're going to improve your brain. You want those dendrites to maintain their connection and grow more of those connections. It's called neuroplasticity. Neuroplasticity can recede or can advance. So you want neuroplasticity to advance to be able to have more of those neural connections. And when you improve the mitochondria that's in your neuron, you're going to actually have more neurotransmitters being released. So you're going to have better brain function. Now, how do you improve that? How do you improve that mitochondria? Well, you can improve that mitochondria 2 ways. Resveratrol is an antioxidant and it helps to improve the mitochondrial health. Also gets rid of senescent cells. All right. So this is part of the anti-aging protocol. All right. But you need a very strong antioxidant. You take a teaspoon of this a day. This is C60. You can get it in avocado oil or in coconut oil. And by taking this every day, teaspoon a day, you're going to be able to soak up those reactive oxygen species and really boost up the mitochondrial health in your cells and produce more ATP. This will help to release more neurotransmitters for brain activity. But it doesn't just work for the brain activity. What it's also doing is just reducing the reactive oxygen species in all your cells. All right. So by doing that, you're improving the health of your body. This is the reason why that people take the antioxidants look younger. This is a very potent antioxidant. Take a teaspoon of this a day, and you're going to notice a big difference. If you work out, take it on an empty stomach. You should take it on an empty stomach even if you're not working out. So take it on an empty stomach is the best absorption of it. But if you're working out, take it on an empty stomach before your workout, and you're going to recover quicker. Taking a really good probiotic is very important, right? So I have 2 different types. I have the powdered form or the capsule form. So I take the powdered form because I mix it with my hummus with the lignans. And by doing that, you're going to improve your gut health and your metabolism. Please go to my store and get the liquid nano silver, structural nano silver. I have it in 3 different types. This one's a 30 ppm. All right, this is the silver solution, 30 ppm. I also have a max 35 and a max 14, which is 35 ppms or 14 ppms. So please go to the store, get your structural nano silver, take a teaspoon of this a day, and it'll neutralize pathogens. You swish it in your mouth, you gargle with it, and you swallow it, about 30 seconds or so. And by doing that, you're going to neutralize pathogens in the oral cavity and down the esophagus and improve that mucosal barrier, which maintains that barrier to prevent getting sick, right? Getting an infection. And in that barrier, in that mucosal barrier, is also your IgAs. So you know, your IgA antibodies. So this is going to help to get through those cold seasons and whatever other crisis that we happen to go through, which may be emerging out of China. But please go to the store and get your structural nano silver liquid. Take a teaspoon of it a day. If you get sick, take a tablespoon or 2 a day. Back to the news.
Greetings. First off, the obligatory kudos to C-SPAN and yourself, Mr. Lamb. Mr. Hitchens, an admirer of your work, sir.
Thank you.
I had a question about, I suppose if you perceive any distinct threat in the work of Edward Said and his particular views on the Middle East, and if you still feel that his thoughts on that matter are trenchant, or if perhaps, given that, at least from what I've read of your own work, that you seem to modify your opinion.
Thanks. Who is he? Before you give
yes, Edward Said is holds the chair at the English department. That's the least you can say. He sort of dominates the English department, really. It's at Columbia University in New York. Is the author of innumerable works of criticism, literary criticism, and it could be said, I suppose, that the whole field of what's called post-colonial studies in English, in other words, the relationship between the language and the way that it became an imperial language, and then the language of people who were ex-subjects of the empire. That's a domain, a field that Edward dominates. And he's a Palestinian Christian Arab by birth, birth in Jerusalem. And he's been very much associated with the PLO. He was in fact a member of the Palestine National Council, which is one of its directing bodies, until he resigned from that. In protest against the autocratic rule of Mr. Arafat, the undemocratic internal nature of the thing. And since the signing of the Oslo Accord, of which he's always been a very stern critic, he's evolved from what you might very, very roughly describe as a nationalist position, calling for a Palestinian state, a state that would be an equal, a state that would not be a vassal or a Bantustan of Israel, but a proper homeland for Palestinians. To the view that it might be better to go all the way back to the beginning, to where a lot of liberal Zionists and secular Arabs always were in the 30s and 40s, and consider having a state that didn't define its citizenship by nationality or by religion. You either were or were not a Palestinian, not that you were a Jewish Palestinian or an Arab or a Druze or a Bedouin Palestinian, but as with the United States, you didn't hyphenate. And though I must say, well, you don't need me to point out there are utopian elements to that desire. I'm very glad that there are people like him on the Arab side who think that way and are brave enough to risk the disapproval of the Arab political establishment.
This story is politics. I know you're not talking about that, but I want your opinion if you would like to give it. Unemployed Andy revs up Gov bid. This is about Andrew Cuomo. And it says that Andrew Cuomo moved swiftly over the weekend to begin preparing his race for governor, approving the hiring of campaign staffers and setting up his fundraising in motion. He's going to make the decision in a couple of weeks.
It's just fascinating to see the arc of history when we're looking back. This is obviously recorded in 2001, this video. But just, to get some context, looking back.
He's the son of Mario Cuomo. They say here that Denise Rich, who is there's a picture of her, the wife of Mark Rich, who was pardoned over the weekend by former President Clinton, will have a welcoming home party to be held next Monday at the Fifth Avenue home of the Rich family. And although Mr. Rich hadn't been in this country for 17 years because he's been a fugitive from justice, while the Rich event won't be a fundraiser, it is expected to attract financially powerful state and national Democratic Party figures. What do you think?
I think the Rich pardon stinks, I must say. And it symbolizes to me the way that Mr. Clinton, while he was in office, decided mainly to socialize with the people who make money rather than the people who earn it in the society, and to make himself incredibly available to do them favors at all times, whether they were Americans or not. So I think that's sad. And then something in me dies a little when I think of another Cuomo campaign, even under another name, because not only is he another Cuomo, but if I'm not wrong, he's married to another Kennedy. So we have to go through all that again and be told about, the magic of Camelot. And I don't think, as I say, my heart sinks at the thought.
Last call for Christopher Hitchens, Naperville, Illinois. Good morning.
Good morning, C-SPAN. Mr. Hitchens here. I have to make a couple of quick comments. I don't believe that the left fully understands how that kind of a society won't work. Look at California right now.
I understand that we would like justice for people and stuff like that, but I just don't see how that would work. And as far as the Vietnam War and what you talk about Kissinger and that, we're too close right now to evaluate the significance of what was done there, okay? The idea that this whole thing is, it's a dynamic world and the whole thing is interrelated. Now, we won the Cold War, okay? Whether we would have or not in Indochina is another matter. It's up to history to debate. The same with the Contras, like this thing and whatnot in Latin America with Noriega and that. If communism would have won, would that have been a better outcome than what we have now?
Thanks, caller.
Well, very simple question to answer, because in Indochina, the insurgent forces did win, in spite of this terrible and wasteful and destructive war in any case. As in my judgment, it was very likely they were going to do, because they had inherited from the struggle against the French occupation of Indochina the mantle of nationalism. And if you notice, the surviving regimes that still call themselves communist and that are still in power and have survived the collapse of communism as a system are basically there because they were part of that post-war anti-colonial nationalist wave, and for no other real ideological reason. I don't profess any ideology. Besides that, to say that it's too soon to say about Vietnam, I mean, I like your mind in a way. As you know, it's a very old joke about the Chinese diplomat asked to comment on the French Revolution, saying, well, it's a bit early to tell. But I think it's not too early to say that we can make judgments about who was lied to in that war. That's the American people. What was damaged, the American Constitution.
Part one.
Who was murdered millions of Vietnamese, and who was responsible? Henry Kissinger.
Sorry, we're out of time. Part one of the two-part series in Harper's Magazine, February edition, has the case against Henry Kissinger, the making of a war criminal, by our guest, Christopher Hitchens. We thank you very much.
It was a pleasure.
And in just a moment, after we show you this story, that Joel Heffley, a Republican.
So that was Hitchens talking about Kissinger all the way back in 2001 and how it's relevant today. Now, I'm not a big fan of Kissinger, but the thing is that we have to look at it from the historical perspective and our current events today. I am concerned about a few things, all right? And this is where you're not probably going to hear it from other people. So it's important that you hear it from my channel. Kissinger was a major power play broker in the 60s all the way to today. So you're talking over 60 major years of international affairs policy. That's a lot. And it's through a lot of presidents. All right. He was a very formidable and powerful figure. And I'm on the side of Hitchens in terms of the whole war crimes thing. All right. With him. And with the thing is, you got to remember, what was his thesis? What were his theses, in his dissertation? It was about equilibriums, and it was about, in his experience in nuclear deterrence, right? And the legitimacy of nations, or the perceived legitimacy of nations. And so over these 60 years, there is an established order that has happened that I am not sure. You gotta remember, Brzezinski, Kissinger, and a couple other key international affairs guys. And there's one from the Chicago School, University of Chicago. I can't remember his name right now. It's a little bit younger. He's still alive. They basically invented a regional study, international affairs, structure, that how it's taught today in the United States. Kissinger was an inventor of a a thinking process. And he was extremely smart, but he was cunning, and he could, maneuver around and be an important figure. But there were war crimes that were taking place too, that he tried to hide from. My concern is that we don't have really deep thinkers like Kissinger. Kissinger was a deep thinker, right? You may not like his policy. He was a deep thinker, though. Same thing with Brzezinski. He was a deep thinker, even though his policies were probably flawed. But the point is that you have a generation, and he's part of that greatest generation, right? That World War II vet generation that established a certain type of thinking. And I think that the people that are now in international policy, the people that are now the power brokers of international affairs and these proposals and how to navigate through the problems of the day, I don't think are as deep thinkers as the ones that are starting to die off. And so when you have this mutual destruction apparatus that's been built up for the last 60 years, that Kissinger was a part of building, right? And you have people running governments like Biden, President Biden, who is no way intellectually sound ever, independent of his problems aging, but he was never intellectually sound to be president compared to, other presidents that we've had, like Kennedy, Eisenhower. My concern is that when a Cuban Missile kind of crisis happens, that there's not going to be a real thinking adult in the room to navigate through the problem. And that this mutual assured destruction apparatus that's been built up is starting to crumble. So you have people that are saying, "Oh yeah, happy that Kissinger is dead." Well, that's at the surface, and that's an emotional response for a person that did have war crimes, especially in during the Vietnam era, and he is tied into that whole national security state problem that we have that we still have today in the United States that needs to be dismantled. But there's an unraveling of the intellect, the dying off of the intellect that built up MAD and mutual assured destruction. So when these intellectuals start to die off and you have subpar policymakers and subpar leaders, and you add in the battle between Jacob and Esau, right? You are seeing an unraveling of a world order that has started to emerge after World War II. And it's going to be something different. And I'm concerned that there's going to be a miscalculation and that unconventional warfare will start to ensue. And the risks of World War III are increasing, not decreasing. That is an important feature. That even though Kissinger made money on both sides, being a diplomat and being a regional affairs guru, especially with China, and he was making money on both sides, right, by being this consultant. He was, in a way, a stabling force long term. Hitchens was talking macro, micro. The micro, honestly, from my estimation, is that the war crimes with Cambodia, right? The macro is the dying off of an intelligentsia that led to a stabilization of MAD. And, you know, presidents like Kennedy, you know, being eliminated and not having really, you know, good presidents after him. That we've had a few, you know, we've had a couple like Reagan, but Kennedy, if you put Biden in the situation that Kennedy was in for the Cuban Missile Crisis, chances are we would have had nuclear exchange. So having the right person there at the right time in questioning, you know, the veracity of some of the generals is really important. So I just don't feel as though we have adults in the room anymore, even though there are problems with Kissinger. But he represents something of a different era. And he was 100 years old when he died. So, you know, in 60 of those years, so 60% of his life was heavily tied into American foreign policy. I mean, he's right up there, you know, as a key figure. All right. We need people in the room that are uniquely intellectual. He was a unique intellectual, independent of you agreed with him or not. So you don't have to agree with someone and they still can be a stabling factor. All right. They could be on the take and still be a stabling factor. And Kissinger was one of these people. There's problems with Kissinger, that's for sure. I agree with Hitchens on that. But I think that, you know, unfortunately Hitchens died in 2011 and didn't see, you know, what has transpired, you know, 14 years later. But I just feel that there's an unraveling of an order. And it's part of this divine. Remember I said 11:30 was going to, you know, 11:30 was, you know, it's the transition. You know, there was this influx of energy from above to below that's going to start on December 1st and start to kindle a flame, or you capture this energy in your vessel for the sensitives, the ones that prepared to be able to capture this. And the ones that haven't, there's going to be a curse and there's going to be a dark cloud over the world. And I didn't know that Kissinger was going to die last night. All right. But the point here is that we're seeing the sunset of an era. And he was a key figure that was a stabilizing actor. Right. Now, Miss Taiwan, you know, she's like real anti-Kissinger because of his stance with China, and you know, and Taiwan, you know, wants someone more that's in the U.S. political circle that's more pro-Taiwanese than Chinese. So I can understand her perspective, but I'm worried about the unraveling of a system that has a lot of unconventional warfare capability. So that's my take on it, right? And I haven't seen a Hitchens video in a while because I've seen almost every single. I'm pretty sure I've seen every single thing that's been published. Hundreds of hours of Hitchens. So I mean, I appreciate his intellect on subjects, and it's fascinating to see when he's younger, and then as he transitions, you know, as he's maturing, and then eventually he gets cancer, and his perspective from that too. But Hitchens and Kissinger, they intersect. And the world that we have today is in large part because of some of the policies that Kissinger promoted with other key figures, right? But he was a original thinker. And I don't think we have enough original thinkers today. And we especially don't have original thinkers that are in powerful positions like the presidency of the United States or running Congress or the Senate. We have weaker people. And if presented with the same problems that we've had in the past, I think that we're going to fail in the future. So with that said, please go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com, and get my D3. This will help you to absorb calcium. It will also help to activate gene expression because D3 is a cofactor for gene expression. If you're low on D3, you're not going to get the gene expression that you need for proper cellular processing. It also helps to get rid of apoptosis, to help with the apoptosis of cells that need to go through apoptosis, especially if they're infected. I wonder why D3 was so important in the last crisis. Structural nano silver lozenges. I have it in sweet menthol 20 count. I also have it in green apple 20 count. These are larger lozenges. And then I have the smaller version, which are called drops, that are in honey lemon 100 count and in blueberry 100 count. So please go to the store, the-studio-reykjavik.com, and get all the different products that I have. Follow my protocol. Liquids and gels for structural nanosilver to neutralize pathogens, strong antioxidant like C60, and bring down inflammation by taking turmeric and ashwagandha. And then you add stuff to that, like B complex and collagen and digestive enzymes and good night formula and clarity factor, vitamin C, zinc. There's lots of products I have on the store. So please go to the store, the-studio-reykjavik.com, and improve your health. Proper diet, proper exercise, proper sleep, proper mental challenging by reading, writing, and talking to people. Talking and writing are really important features that I've noticed with elderly people that have really good cognitive function. Another thing that you should do is, with that proper exercise, also focus on balance. All right. So we have cerebellum. The cerebellum is in the back of the brain. So your brain, you have the cerebral part of the brain, and then you have the cerebellum, which is the balancing part. What is being found with people that age better are ones that have better balance. So you want to do balancing exercises. All right. You don't have to get crazy with like mega yoga type stuff, but yoga helps. All right. A little bit of resistance training, which keeps your bones strong. And builds that muscle that you need. You don't have to be a weightlifter, bodybuilder, but some resistance training to help with the maintain muscle mass, some resistance training to help with the bone density, right? A little bit of cardio, on an elliptical or on a bike or even swimming. As you get older, you don't want to do too much running because it's going to be too much stress on your joints, especially your ankle and your knees and your hips. And balancing exercises. And there's some simple ones like holding your ankle with one foot and holding your hand out, right? And switching, counting to 20 or something like that. And, doing some simple yoga exercises. Don't get too crazy. You don't have to. But balance is a big part that you'll notice with people that are older, as they'll start losing balance, right? And they're losing bone mass and losing muscle mass. So resistance training, but not too much, a little bit of cardio, Walking is a really good exercise to reduce aging, advancement, and balance. But you don't have to get too crazy with the yoga, but like 5 different simple exercises where it's 3 sets of 20 seconds, right? So you're doing it for a minute for each exercise or something like that. And with that balance and a little bit of the stretching, you're aging better. You're aging better. So just put that into your mind. And it's also proper supplementation. When you do all this together, you're going to actually fare a lot better. You're going to enjoy your life more. When you're chronically hurting, or if you've lost your flexibility, or if you fall, you break something easily, that's not an enjoyable life. If you're not challenging your brain, then you're starting to atrophy. Your dendrites start to recede. Your neurotransmitters start to shoot out less, right? So it's time. It's time to think about these kinds of things. And the earlier you start, the better off you are, because of the compounding effect. So please take my advice. Better, exercise, proper exercise, and stretching and balancing. A little bit of resistance training, a little bit of cardiovascular. Don't get too crazy. Proper diet, proper sleep, proper supplementation, proper mental challenging. You're going to do pretty well. So go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com, and get the products that I offer. Also, please subscribe to my channels. I have 3 YouTube channels. I have Brighteon, Bitchute, and Rumble. Please subscribe to all 6 channels. Links are in the description of this video. Please, if you could, also go to my website, the-studio-reykjavik.com. On the homepage, at the very bottom, you can donate through Stripe or PayPal. You can also buy me a coffee. Link is in the description of this video to help support my news coverage. I keep all my videos for free when I'm covering the news and trying to inform the public about certain things. So thank you for supporting my work. Please take my links and share them with your social network, or ask your social network to subscribe to my channel. I have some really important, unique things to say. All right. And the larger the audience, the better. So through your help, that can be established. You can also support me by being a paid member on my channel for Patreon. Again, I don't have anything behind a paywall, so it's just through a donation mechanism. But the idea is that you're helping support the news coverage to allow for all my content to be free. There are a lot of YouTubers out there that will give a little piece, a little snippet, and say, well, the really important content is behind the paywall. That's not fair. If you have something important to say, then you should just be saying it. And people that appreciate your work will share it. Your channel will grow, and what will happen is that there'll be people that will support your work in different mechanisms. So please donate, subscribe to Patreon, share the links, ask your social network to subscribe to my channels. Make sure you subscribe to all my channels, all 6 channels, and go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com, and get the health products and follow my protocol, and it will improve your health and slow down that aging process. You'll be amazed, and if you follow what I'm saying, you'll be amazed on how beneficial it is for you. Thank you for listening, and have a nice night.